I'm going to show you a technology and show you a bunch of images that were just impossible to get 4 years ago. I'm going to show you about a new technology that lets us take the living human brain and map the connections of their brain in a vivid, as Michelle Obama says, high definition. This is a technology that probably this decade may help a member of your family. But first, let me tell you about a phone call that I had. I get to the office, and I hear the FBI in DC wants to urgently talk to you about your work. Well, I don't know about you, but what would you think? I didn't have a clue, and what I imagined wasn't good. Special agent, I'd like to know about your research. Yeah, what would you like to know? Well, I'm in charge of the FBI Victims Unit, and we're dealing with the Boston Marathon bombing. We've had 250 people in the blast zone area, and they may have had a traumatic brain injury. And we went to the Army, and they said, you had the best technology to diagnose TBI. Can you help us? Yes, we have that technology. We're ready to serve. Fly them to Pittsburgh. The technology that I'm going to describe deals with a major health cost in the US, brain connectivity disorders. They come in different forms, for example, neuropathology, where you have a tumor, developmental disorders such as autism, neurodegeneration, as in Alzheimer's, and traumatic brain injury, where a cable has broken. They represent 10.4 million cases a year, and what we're looking at is a technology to see that wiring. We need an anatomical diagnosis of connection loss. I like the statement that a special ops person that we worked with said. He said, it's like, I don't know if I'm missing an arm or a leg. Well, which is it? Once you can understand, you can work through that stuff. So the bad news is there is no FDA-approved technology to allow us to accurately diagnose the brain cable breakage without harvesting the brain. The good news is in Pittsburgh, we've invented some research that will enable such diagnosis. What we want to do is make the track breakage visible and quantifiable, so that just like an X-ray can show you where there's a broken bone, we developed something we call high-definition fiber tracking that says what cable is broken and how badly. So think of an auto trauma. If the car has an accident, depending on how the accident happened, different cables in the car break, the lights don't work, the radio doesn't work, things like that. The person in the car, depending on the accident, perhaps memory doesn't work, language, affect control, decision-making, motor function, control of body function. If that happens, now your family needs the technology to tell you what is broken, what does it mean, and what are we going to do about it to recover function. So the technology, high-definition fiber tracking, is a technology where we put somebody in a high-performance MRI magnet. We then do what's called tag labeling of the protons at various locations, and we watch as those diffuse throughout the cable. And then based on that process, we can make a map of all of the major cables of that individual, where the colors here are different cables. So the idea is we start with a structural MRI. The cables are this spaghetti, the connections within that system, and then we can look at a single cable, and you have these little output parts where different functions, for example, in the language system exist. We can take an individual and literally dissect the parts of that cable. So this is where auditory input comes in. This is how you say words on these cables. This is how you recognize objects. This is the interlink that puts that all together. And what we now do is we can overlay the structures and see how big are the cables at each point. How long does it take? About 10 minutes. Less time than my talking to you to collect the data. We then can create a circuit diagram where the links on that diagram illustrate these different components of the circuit diagram. Then, just like bones in your body, we can map the cables of your brain. And we can use this in different clinical situations. So I'm going to start with the example of neuropathology. When a surgeon's going in, they're going to probably cut some cables on the way in and out. Cut carefully. All right? We want to, we want language there tomorrow, right? So what they use this technology for is the first thing on a tumor, was it a clean push? Did it push all the cables away? In which case now they're going to be very aggressive and take that tumor out. Or is it crossed with other things? We can do route planning. Do I go in this way, or this way, or this way? Which is going to do the least damage to the person? We got to get to the tumor, otherwise the person's going to die. But we want to do as little damage on the way in and out as possible. So that this is an illustration of one of our cases where the red in the middle shows you what we said we'd lose. And on the right, you can see we did a good job of predicting what the effect of that was. Here we have a case of an individual who had a tumor that was all around the corticospinal tract. Had they taken out, they would have paralyzed her. Well, we then, in the OR, had a projection of where the medical instruments were relative to the tumor, and they very gently aspirated out the tumor. Think of it as like having a curtain and vacuuming it and never moving the curtain. Because if you move the curtain, they're paralyzed. You need precision to know where those fiber tracts are, and this technology provides us that precision. This is a case of a young woman who went to 3 leading medical centers on the East Coast. They said, we can't help you because we'll do too much damage on the way in. Do no harm. But she is becoming paralyzed on the side of her body. And we said, well, let's look at it and see where the fibers are. And in particular, we noticed that there already was a hole in the area that had to have a repair of the vascular system. When the surgeon went in, they could see that that area was yellowed, indicating that the damage had already been done. They did a very precise surgical cut within that set. You can see his nice sharp line within that. And he was able to repair the damage. So this technology has restored lives. Robert Freelander, the surgeon, said Ashley could not move half her body. We needed to operate on her. If we understand where all the normal fibers are, we can stay away from them. Having high-definition fiber tracking is what enabled us to get to the lesion. So I'd like you to think, if it was your child, they're becoming paralyzed, looking at a lifetime of paralysis on that body. And now you have a technology that can do, and let Ashley explain what happened.
Where I am right now is amazing. To actually get out and live on my own, I didn't think it was possible. I am cooking, driving, and have a full-time job.
Cooking, thriving, and have a full-time job. Like in many things in life, everything starts with a diagnosis. If you can't see the problem, it's nearly impossible to fix the problem. We give visualization, quantification, so you can see the problem. We can apply it in surgery. We can apply it in neurodevelopment. A young child with autism, you can think of it as the wiring is different. Atypical, as some people describe it. What we want to do is map that circuit diagram to see what we have to work with. Because you'd like in the next year to establish communication, because if that child can't ask to go to the bathroom for the next 5 years, they're going to be messed up. We want to quickly say, what do we got to work with? Now, I've had the privilege of working with Temple Grandin. If you create cool images, all of a sudden Discovery Channel and 60 Minutes show up, and they sent her to us. Could you see anything different in her brain? So we did the same dissection that we did in the previous case. Auditory system, motor system, vision system, interlinks within that. And now we can go look at her brain, link for link, and see what's different. And we found one part which in her brain, the section that lets you speak and connect to what you see, that was down 99%. Her language probably was hanging on a thread of connections. Another part, which is visual object recognition, was up 300%. So there are parts that grow, there are parts that are not. What we want particularly early is what parts can we build upon to get effective communication with that individual. So in our planned activities in autism, we map a child's language system. We want to identify what approaches are most likely to establish communication, target the rehabilitation, and very importantly, monitor for growth along the rehabilitation process. Now, the third area I'm going to talk about is neurotrauma. And I note all the work that I'm doing is in conjunction with David Okonkwo, who's the head of neurotrauma at UPMC. If you have a severe brain injury in Western PA, he's probably the person that will see you. And what we want to do is say what tracks are broken. Now, this could happen from a war wound, assaults, auto, sports, falls. All of these break connections in the brain. So I'm going to give you a short course to find the invisible wound of war, traumatic brain injury. So there are two rules. The brain and the body are enormously symmetric, so that just like my fingers line up beautifully within that set, if you see somebody like this, you can guess that at some point they had a hand trauma. Well, what we do is map out the brain connections, and you can see the changes in the connection spread, where those cables are going. There's a second rule, which is repeated trauma blows away the small branches. In the left here is a figure of Central Park after Hurricane Sandy went through. And you can see that the branches have the small, or the trees have the small branches blown away. Well, we can, in a person with a war-wounded, highly decorated veteran, we can see the reduction of those successive blasts. This person had 400 blasts. So, the course is over. Now I want to see if you can see the damage. I'd like you to look at the top middle and compare the red and the tan. Now look to the left and the right. Which person looks like there's part of the red missing? Any guesses? A, B, or C? C, all right. On the bottom, see the fine connections projecting up, start in the middle. Who's missing the fine connections, A, B, or C? Okay. You have, in 1 minute, done what no man a person on the planet could do 2 years ago. You could see traumatic brain injury. You could see the asymmetry of the brain. You could see this reduction in arborization of the brain. That's what a good technology does. You can see things that were impossible before. If, as you go home, if a member of your family has a auto accident, then you're going to want to know what's broken. Let's assume that Radna went home. There was an accident. And they went to a major medical center, and they got a report that kind of looks like this. She's going to be my simulated patient in a moment, where the report says, this is of uncertain clinical significance. Now think of this. The personality is different. And this is what you get. She and her husband, Grant, will worry for many sleepless nights saying, how did this change? What's different in the brain? Well, what we do is we provide a map, a report of about 20 pages of each of the cables of the brain. And now what I'm going to do, if she steps out, is show you, hopefully, our technology that we use, which we call providing a virtual scanner within that set. So what we have here, I'm just going to go how this might be in a clinical consult. You can see here the side of the brain. You can see the nose kind of in the front. The blue is the language cable. The tan is the motor cable. And if I turn around to the other side, then you can see the blue looks about the same within that set. If I look in the front, on the top, you can see plenty of blue on both sides within that set. Now what I'm going to do is switch and show you the fiber track. This is not her brain, by the way, I want to point out. I'm going to show you the fiber track of what the exam would look like. Now here you can see this nice fan-shaped. This is collecting connections from all of the brain as part of the motor system. And if we go to the other side, here you can see what has been lost. So you can see where in the front of the brain, a lot of the connections are missing. The fact that those connections, which control the hand and the foot, etc., are not working is now part of, is an illustration of the process. Thank you. Now, she and her husband and the clinical team can now work as a team to address the known problem. The saying, "What's wrong with me?" stage is over, and now we can address those problems. So what we do is we let you see the damage of the brain for an individual. We then quantify the damage in the different regions. We can plot each cable and show on the left that the left and right are very nicely lined up on the bottom, but on the right you can see that those yellow areas, that's where things are missing, so we can point those out. Then we can help you understand. It's like, I don't know if I'm missing an arm or a leg. Well, which is it? Well, to take an illustration, we had a person with an all-terrain vehicle accident. He was paralyzed at the end of, on one side at the end of that accident. And we could plot on the one axis how many connections were left to each of the regions and what the function was. And the guy at the time was still paralyzed and said, well, what we know is that you've lost 60% of the wires for the leg. You've lost 67% for the arm and 97% for the hand. Now, in many medical conditions, performance stays stable, and then as it starts to drop, it falls off a cliff. We believe that with months of rehabilitation, your leg and your arm will come back. Your hand doesn't look so good. Now, over those months, leg came back completely, arm is a little funny. His hand, 3 years later, is still a club. But by targeting the rehabilitation, we could put that limited time of rehabilitation to what can actually benefit. We have something we can do. We can target the rehabilitation based on the anatomy of what's broke, on the neurophysiology of what functions have been lost. We then create, on a mobile iPad-based situation, various training programs to regrow those cables and monitor that effect. Now, in 2015, my group will be deploying this technology to 11 leading DoD hospitals, VA centers, and university hospitals. We go to the best research labs in the country and consolidate the technology so that it can operate in a clinical domain. And then we rebroadcast that out to the clinical centers. First, in traumatic brain injury, this is the network we're setting up, and then later in, hopefully, autism and traumatic brain injury. I'm going to end with one of my favorite quotes from science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. 4 years ago, this was magic. Now, it lets us help people. Thank you.
David Okonkwo and I are privileged to lead a talented team of 33 Pittsburgh researchers to invent, test, and deploy this technology. The good news is this technology will be ready in Pittsburgh to help your family. With growing local and national support, Pittsburgh will lead the way to improve the lives of millions this decade.